Welcome to podcast number 6. So I'm just taking a spin over to Cromie Park in Ladner. Now, to tell you the God's honest, it's not the nicest looking park in Ladner, but it does serve a very useful purpose for me. Whenever I'm looking to do little voiceover recordings with any kind of an outdoor feel to them, I typically go down to Cromie Park. So the reason that I'm doing this is that we have discovered a couple of more letters from Sydney, and I need to do a little voiceover to link using them in the video, because at the moment I've got a rough cut put together that's about 90 minutes long. But the discovery of these two letters really is something that I want to include in the final film. So the two letters could hardly be more different. I'll show you them on the screen side by side and you'll see what I mean. One is a nice clear penmanship from a place called Barnwell Hospital, and the other was written in pencil, I think over a couple of days I'd say, and is all a bit sort of over the page, so to speak. And it was written several months before that, in around about September, we think, of 1915, and that was written from an army camp in Folkestone. So one of the things about Sydney that's become quite apparent is that he was a man with a sense of humour, and that comes across quite nicely in his letter from in the earlier of these two letters, the one that's rather fragmented. He talks in a little detail about going down to a town called Hastings. He visited there twice, I'm guessing for a bit of R&R, and I can sort of see the mischievous side of him coming out as he's talking a little bit about the young English women that he met, who were obviously quite fond of Canadians and seem to be willing to take almost anything that he says at face value. So when he talks about the wilds of Canada, it certainly sounds as if the young women swallow this hook, line and sinker.
September 3rd. Made 2 trips down to Hastings. Good time there. Large sea resort. Lots of pretty girls fond of Canadians. Great time telling them about wild Indians. They believe everything I tell them about lions and tigers, not to mention bears and buffaloes.
But both letters give us lovely little insights into what was going on. I won't give too much of the plot away at this stage, but just, safe to say that, Sydney was, I think, struggling a little bit with sort of being in the army. He was, I think, it wasn't proving to be all that it was cracked up to be. I think there was a bit of frustration there. And certainly in his letter from Barnwell, there was a poignant little line about the fact that he was looking forward to going back to Canada. And obviously we know that he didn't make that, but it's kind of sad to think that, I'm sure like all soldiers, they were expecting to come over, do their duty, and then presumably go back home. So one of the pleasurable parts of this undertaking has been a chance to work with Pat Cuthbert. He's the guy who played Sydney in the reenactment of Sydney's enlistment. And to hear Pat read Sydney's letters, it's just lovely. I mean, it obviously brings them to life, and one gets to hear Sydney's voice. And the content of those letters is humorous. It's sad. There's certainly a poignancy to it. I mean, when we hear Sydney speak about his frustration with being in England and looking forward to getting back to Canada, we know that never happened. So there's a real sadness around hearing lines like that.
I'm afraid my opinion of England is not very good, and I will certainly be glad to get back home to Canada again. I've always had a good time here, but things seem so different. Things here are quite expensive, and the tradespeople always add a little when the Canadians come along.
A photograph has also come to light that was taken around about that time, and again I will show you that, and it's tied in with Sydney's reference to the fact that the weather was absolutely atrocious, that just rained day in and day out. And for any of us from that part of the world, or even from this part of the world, you know that there are times when it rains and it just never seems to stop. So this picture of the army camp that he was in, he is very specific about whereabouts his tent is. I think he says it's the 3rd tent in from the right, and he's standing in front of it. Now the resolution is so poor that we can't identify him at all, but it's a nice little photograph, gives us a sense of what it was like. In the other letter from Barnwell, as I said, there's a nice description of what Christmas was like in the hospital.
The hospital clergyman held service in the ward on Christmas morning. It was the first time I had been able to lie in bed and hear this service. It seems very funny. The ward was all decorated with holly and evergreen and looked quite cheerful, but would much sooner have been out having a good time.
The other thing that was sort of sad and poignant is the fact that he made an interesting observation about English shopkeepers. Like many Canadians and others, they were pretty annoyed at the fact that whenever they showed up, that a number of English shopkeepers would tend to raise the prices. And I really found this quite offensive, actually, especially at that time of the war when all of the colonial troops were volunteers. I mean, this was way before conscription. So the notion that these guys had shown up out of the goodness of their own hearts, essentially, and would then find themselves being taken advantage of by the local shopkeepers, I thought that was pretty bad form. But I guess these things happen. War does provide an opportunity for some kind of profiteering, I think, from certain types. Sad to think that Sidney and his mates were subjected to stuff like that. But anyway, that's about it. I'm just about here at Cromie Park, and I'll do my thing. It's just a short one-liner that I have to insert into the film. But as I said, I will keep you informed. Remembrance Day is coming up, and we're hoping to lay a wreath at the cenotaph. We've spoken to the guys from the Legion, and they seem to be happy enough for us to do that. So hopefully we can do. We'll have a bit of footage of that. Perhaps use that in the next podcast. So thanks again for your support, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.